How's it going, guys? Today we're going to do a valve clearance tune-up on a 2001 Honda Accord V6. It's the 3-liter. I'm going to show you all the steps and all the tools that you need to do it. You want to go ahead and pop the hood, pull it up. We're going to end up taking off the valve covers. And to do that, we're going to have to take off a couple components. All this plastic covers on the engine, all the connections to the throttle body. Full list right here on my computer. It says for the 2000 model, we're going to need to remove throttle body cover, ignition wire cover, intake manifold covers, all the plastic parts on the top. The evap hoses from the body, vacuum hose and breather pipes, intake air duct, throttle body cable, brake booster vacuum hoses, crankcase PCV hose. And then we'll need to set the camshaft gear at a certain spot for each of the valves to be able to adjust them. Overall, for the intake, you're going to want a 0.2 to 0.24 millimeter or a 8 thou to 9 thou inch gap, and you'll use a fuel gauge for that. Exhaust, you want a 0.28 or 0.32 mil or 11 to 13 thou inch. And these are the markings for them. Before starting this project, you want to be sure that your engine is as cold as it can be, because you're going to be disconnecting a water bypass hose on the throttle body, and if it is at all warm, it will shoot out and it won't be pleasant. Whenever working in your engine bay or any engine components, it's a good idea to always disconnect the battery by removing the negative battery cable first. It's 13 mil. With these engine plastic covers, all you need is a flathead. You just twist these until they are straight. They should just pop off. And now we're going to get into removing all the connections for the throttle body, because the whole goal is to end up taking off these valve covers. And to do that, I believe it to take the intake manifold off. But you definitely have to take off all the ignition system. Now for removing these plastic wire covers, you're going to need a 10 mil wrench or 10 mil socket. Pop the wire out from it, and then they should pop straight through. Or intake, you'll need to use a pair of pliers to pop these off, and then a Phillips head screwdriver in there to loosen that up so you can take it off. This side's just spring. Right there. To make it easier, I'm going to take off this cover, and then it should just pop straight out. Now that should come off. This is 4 screws for each, or screw right there, right there, and one up there. Don't have to remove this one. It makes it a little easier though, because then it has an angle to get past this battery mount. Start working on this side. We got to take everything disconnected from the throttle body so we can remove this entire thing. So I already got the plug right here. There's a plug right here. Got another plug down there. And then a couple hoses. Got most of them done. There's a hose clamp on this one below it. Disconnect these hoses right here. This one right here just connects right here, and one below it. And some coolant will come out, and you'll just have to refill that. Use a 12 millimeter socket to remove or loosen the bolts on the side closest to the cable. It's important to do only the side so you have the same depth set back when you do it again, or tighten it and put it back together. And this is the only side that allows you to take it off, because once you loosen these all the way, put them up against, there's a gap you might see that gap, so you can pull it back and pull it through like that. And then these can just twist around and pop off the back side. That cable closest to the front end is the cruise control cable, and the one in the back is definitely the throttle cable. They're disconnected, and now we can take these pieces off back here. You grab the mounting spot with a pair of pliers lightly, so you can wiggle it as you pull with your other hand, and it makes it a million times easier and doesn't risk it being ripped pulling it off. Everything is disconnected from the intake manifold. You can get a 12mm socket and break loose these 6 bolts that hold it in, or 3 nuts and 6 bolts total. There's one right there, the main 6 right here, and then 2 on this hook. Just take them all off completely, and then your manifold will be loose to take off. They're all 12mm. I was able to get this off. I left one hose connected, which I believe is the PCV, which is this line right here. It's pretty hard to get to. As you can see, it's on the back left side. Before continuing any further, always a good idea to cover these intake runners. I'm using some painter's tape just to mask them over so you don't drop any nuts or bolts in there and potentially ruin your engine. Hex bit or Allen key, this one's size 6, and take off these ignition coils. Alright, I just disconnected the PCV plug from the top of this valve. Also, I'm going to be disconnecting this breather hose, I believe, from here. And then we'll be on the step of using the 10mm to disconnect or loosen all these bolts, all these 5, and take the valve cover off and inspect what we're working with. This is also a great chance to be able to inspect your wires for your ignition system as well as your coils, see if there's any oil in there. And you can take your spark plugs out and inspect those to see if you have anything wrong with those or need those to be replaced. Alright, in order to get the timing cover off so that you can line up the cylinders, you're going to have to take off this power steering pump. Stupid design, but so in order to take this belt off, you have to loosen the mounting bolt right here, which is 12mm. Inside, use an extended socket like this, and there's a nut underneath that's 12mm as well. Loosen that, and then you can use the 12mm socket to loosen this. And once it's at the end, you can push it down. The belt should come off, and you'll have access to the timing cover bolt, which is this bottom left one. There are a total of 5, as you can see here. Once that is off, you'll be able to see the timing marks in there with the numbers on the cylinders. I'll zoom in for you. Right there you see a 3 and a 6. What we're going to be doing is we're going to grab a socket to turn the engine over, and we'll start with number 1. This is the rear cylinder head. This is the front cylinder head. So this is the engine layout completely. We start with lining up the camshaft number 1 with a timing mark on cover, just like this. As you can see, there's a little notch out of the cover. You line those up. Start with number 1, then you go to 4. You do this in order clockwise. 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6. And as you can see from this diagram, that means we're going to be going 1 in the rear, 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6. So make a zigzag pattern on it, and it'll be starting with exhaust on number 1. Oh, the intake's in the middle, sorry. Exhaust is on the outside. So we'll do exhaust, intake, then switch to 4, keep the intake, then go to exhaust, then switch to 2, keep the exhaust, go to intake, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. Should be straightforward, and we'll get to it. Okay, now you're gonna want to get in the car, turn the wheel all the way to the right, just like as I did. And luckily, Honda did a little convenience to us and put a little hole there so we can access the crankshaft. So that's a 19mm socket. I have mine on a big ratchet with an extension. So you can stick it in there and be able to turn the engine. The longer the ratchet is, the better, because it's going to be hard to turn. And you're going to want to aim for finding cylinder number 1. Mine happens to be the one painted white, and it'll be lined up to that white hash mark right there in the middle of the screen. And once that's lined up, we can start on the back of the engine and get our feeler gauges out, find which one is correct, and I'll show you the process. So with this step, we'll need 3 tools: a 10mm wrench, a feeler gauge, and we'll need a 0.008 inch and a, let's see if I can put 0.012 inch. The bigger one, 0.012 inch, is going to be used for the exhaust. The reason for that is because the exhaust valves experience more heat, and therefore they expand more, and they'll need more of a clearance for that expansion. The intake, on the intake side, doesn't experience all that heat, so it gets a smaller clearance. So I'm going to start in the far back, all the way back there. There's 2 per cylinder on each intake and exhaust. So we're going to start in the far back left, right there. First, we're just going to knock the 10mm nut loose slightly. First, of course, we're going to check if this fits and if there's any clearance for that. Probably a lot of clearance in there. So I'm going to go ahead and knock it just slightly loose so I can move that adjusting screw. As you can see, this is the adjusting screw in the middle, and that's a lock nut for it. As soon as that nut is knocked loose, this will screw in and out. Tighten it to screw it, and you're going to want to have this in between the end of that screw and the top of where it sits. And the goal is to have this have a feeling of someone just slightly pulling against it, like it's the same set of fingers of you pulling against yourself. It'll be just a slight tug. It's not going to be stuck in there, and it's not going to be free to move around like crazy. It's just going to be a slight tug on it, like pulling tape out of a tape dispenser. So here's an example of a good clearance for the, I think this is the intake. I went ahead, I have 2 pairs of these feeler gauges, so I bent these to make it easier for me. I use the other ones more professionally. Just want to line it up inside of there, push it in, should be able to go in, and then you can see how there's a little bit of force between this. That's perfect right there, to where it's just moving and just catching at the same time. Alright, so the idea with this, you can see this is the feeler gauge in there. It's pretty loose. So I already knocked this nut loose. So I'm just going to tighten this down until it doesn't move, and then back off a little bit. Just a little bit. And it should just be just like that. Just hard enough. And then while you hold the screwdriver in place, you take your ratchet, keep the screwdriver from moving, and tighten this nut down, and then recheck your feeler gauge. Make sure it's the same. And it feels great to me. So then I can move on to the next section. Once you cycle through all the cylinders, checking all the clearances, you can go back through all of the lock nuts and tighten them down to 14 foot-pounds, and then recheck all of them. You go back through the whole cycle again with the feeler gauges. Again, it's 0.008 for the intake, which is the middle section, and 0.012 on the outside. These are all in inches. And if they're all just good enough, then you're good to go. Also, I think it'd be interesting to know that the majority of the ones that I had to fix, there was like over half of them on the intake were out of spec. Only less than half, only a couple on the exhaust side were out of spec. Most of them on the exhaust side were pretty good. So just to let you know. I could have forgot to mention the important parts to replace. The valve cover gaskets and grommets for the spark plugs, and mounting bolts for the valve cover. Take these old ones off, clean the inside a little bit, pop these in, and then you're good to put it back on. Moving these when installing the new spark plug grommets, I grabbed a 26 millimeter socket just to press them into place. You can do it with your hand. You just line them up with the lip facing out like that, and you cover it and you just press it in with your hand. So before putting your valve covers back on, you have a chance to clean them up, make sure that you have no other parts and inside where the valve covers cover, and also make sure that your surfaces are clean for your new valve cover gaskets to mount onto. And you're all good to go, and start putting everything else back together. Make sure that belt is on, tightened up to just about a point that you can't turn it 90 degrees. Make it tough for you to turn it 90 degrees on it. That's just a rule of thumb. All right, now that you got it all back together, all the hoses snapped back in, all the connections back together, I went ahead and tightened up the throttle and cruise control cable so that when you press down on it, it just has a little bit of give until it starts hitting the actual throttle body lever. It used to be like a whole inch deflection. It's crazy. Then you can hook your battery back up, start it back up, and see how you did. All right, here's the test. Feels real smooth, way better than it was. Now the real test is when it gets up to operating temperature. You'll actually be able to tell if you did a good job, but as long as you were in spec and follow these instructions, you should have done it all perfectly. Thanks again for watching. Put any comments or questions below, and don't forget to subscribe.